Welcome everyone, and we will be getting started in about a minute. Again, welcome everyone. We're waiting for folks to join us, and we will get started with sales leadership challenges with the reopening economy in about 30 seconds. Hello everyone, and welcome to our weekly virtual happy half hour. I am Michelle Richardson of the Sales Performance Research Center here in North Carolina. I'm joined again by Russ in California, our Director of Facilitation and Coaching Excellence. This webinar will be recorded and sent to participants. You can also find previous recordings of our webinars on our website. That's brooksgroup.com. If you'll navigate to the resources tab, you'll see a landing page for the virtual happy half hour webinar. All of our previous webinars are there, as well as our weekly research briefs that summarize our survey data. This is actually week 8 of our weekly virtual happy half hour. We are joined by producer Rich. He is providing tech support and monitoring the Q&A. Rich will also be posting some helpful links and reference information throughout the session today, so be sure to monitor that chat window. We'll also be taking questions throughout today's session, so feel free to submit those through Q&A or chat. We'll have some dedicated time at the end, but we'll also take those questions as they come in. Today's topic is sales leadership challenges with the reopening economy. I know as of yesterday when I was looking online, there are at least 31 states here in the US that have partially reopened or are reopening soon. I know here in North Carolina, we enter phase 1 of reopening at 5 o'clock today. So we also know this is a global concern, and I see from our chat, we have folks from Europe joining us. And we know that Italy, Spain, and Germany have also started reopening. France starts loosening restrictions next week. And of course, Asia has been in the reopening phase for a while. You know, obviously all of our reopening, at least here in the US, is a phased approach. So we also know that this is not going to be a switch that gets flipped on and everything turns back on again. And so obviously that brings a lot of challenges associated with safety, with sales team travel, with customer management, and even how we work with each other internally in departments. We're hearing that from sales leaders that we're talking to, I know in the organizations that I speak with, as well as in our sales leadership forums that meet weekly. And today's webinar is sponsored by the Brooks Sales Leadership Forum. Russ, why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. We've been talking about these for 8 weeks now. And again, I want to just encourage you, if for some reason you have not decided to participate, we have new groups forming every week. The Sales Leadership Forum is a chance to meet in a small group with your peers, leader to leader, to talk about issues in real time. So for example, last week, some of the key topics were, as we start to reopen, what are the new buying signals that people are looking for? And does it mean you have to change the way in which you qualify? What's the significance of someone agreeing to take a meeting face-to-face as opposed to virtually? And then what tools can we use to improve efficiency? So the sales leadership forums are continuing to form. We would encourage you to join them. There is no cost to join those forums. And if you'd like more information, you can just email us at forum@thebrooksgroup.com. So thanks, Rich, for putting that in the chat. This week, what we're going to talk about, and Michelle, if you want to go ahead and share the slides, are two different aspects of the reopening economy. Just as we had challenges when we started to close things, we had the same issue when we're now getting ready to reopen. And really that's around the management, which is having to do with tasks and plans and procedures and planning, and then the leadership. How are we going to manage through people? And one of the things that also has come up through the forum is the idea that we really have unequal performance among our teams, and that this time has pointed out that some are better producers than others. Some of our managers are better coaches than others. And as we get ready for sort of this next normal, we really need to be thinking about what are we going to need as we go forward. So that's what we're going to talk about. One thing before we jump into the data, we had great success with the social selling lead generation workshop this week. I want to thank everybody who participated. We have opened another one for next Tuesday. So if you're looking for ideas on how to generate leads in this time, in this economy, it would be great if you would email us at webinar@thebrooksgroup.com. We have a few seats left for Tuesday. I believe it's 3 o'clock. It's a 90-minute workshop, and you are all you're invited to get more information and participate in that. So with that, Michelle, should we look at the data?
Absolutely. So before I get into the data for this week, I do want to plug the surveys. So we have been issuing surveys on a weekly basis for the past 8 weeks. And this is really how we get the content to share with you all. And so those surveys are released on Mondays. And I would encourage every one of you to please participate. When you see that survey email come through, it takes about 5 minutes at most. We promise we keep them short. But this is really how together we can navigate this whole environment. Obviously, these are unprecedented times. And so we look for your input in terms of the issues to address. And, just to be able to give you all advice on how to best navigate. So we've been tracking the data for sales results now for 8 weeks. And what we're showing you here are the trends. And what I'm showing you are kind of the 2-week blocks. Hey,
Michelle, I think you need to share the slides.
They are showing that they are shared, but let me stop sharing and I will start sharing again. So just bear with me just
Some people see them. I am the one who doesn't, so it's my issue, not anybody else's.
All right, see, we're keeping it real, folks. We're keeping it real. Then I will keep moving. All right, so sales results. And we've been tracking this again for 8 weeks, and we are showing you periods ending March 27th, April 10th, April 24th, and of course this week, May 8th. And I think obviously the biggest trend, which we've been seeing for a while now, is the number of organizations significantly behind plan. And that continues to increase. We're showing just over 60% significantly behind plan, and another 30% that are slightly behind plan. But I also want to point out that there is some silver lining, and we want to find those glimmers of hope. We want to find those silver linings where we can. And this week in particular, we're noticing an increase in organizations that are significantly ahead of plan. So we've been saying all along, we know a lot of you are behind plan. Obviously, the need and the interest in lead generation and prospecting is certainly real, but there are organizations that are doing well. And there are organizations that are slightly ahead of plan, and you'll notice an uptick for this week, about 5%. It's a small number, but it's there. Organizations that are significantly ahead of plan. And then we've also been looking at the ability of companies to collect from clients. And we've been tracking this information from the beginning of April. And you'll note, for those of you that took our survey this week, we asked organizations about the challenge of getting their customers to pay invoices. And 1/3 of you said this was extremely difficult, and another 44% of you indicated that it was somewhat difficult, and you anticipated this as the economy continues to reopen. So what are companies doing to ensure the ability to collect? You'll notice that aside from still a large number of organizations that are doing nothing different, that there are close to 30% who are having sales reps contact customers to discuss the customer's credit status and ability to pay. You also see an increase in the number of organizations that are having their financial services companies or financial services representatives reaching out. The other thing that we've noticed is an uptick in organizations prioritizing shipments and deliveries based on ability to pay. So this is new for this time period. Obviously that number went down a little bit, and we're seeing that increase as well. We're also hearing anecdotally about organizations that are negotiating with clients based on loyalty. So giving preferential treatment to your best customers, your most loyal customers, and negotiating harder on terms. Now this can go both ways. It can go harder. So we know that organizations are getting much tighter on payment terms and adhering to net 30, net 60, et cetera. But we're also hearing organizations going the opposite direction and trying to be more flexible on those payment terms as well. So another item that we have been tracking for 8 weeks now, which is the greatest challenge that your sales teams are experiencing right now as a result of the current environment. And we've noticed a change in those challenges as we've gone along. I was commenting to Russ before we started the webinar. Earlier in this time period, in those first couple of weeks, we saw a lot of challenges around just getting folks used to working from home and interacting with customers virtually. And now we're seeing those challenges really shift to what I would consider to be very hard business issues. So lost business due to customer shutdowns, for instance, a reliance on event-based prospecting like trade shows. So you just can't get face-to-face. And so now it's more than just how do I connect? It's having true business impact on your business numbers. And obviously that connects back to the data that we were seeing on sales results. Lead generation, accessing customers, a real issue for many of you. And as Russ mentioned just a couple minutes ago, we have that prospecting workshop on Tuesday. So if this is truly an issue for you, I would encourage you to check that out. Last week's weekly webinar was also on prospecting, so you can also take a look at that download. Supply chain and inventory management are an issue for many of you. Some of you have strong order flow despite the current environment, but supply chain is an issue. Labor shortages are an issue due to shutdowns. Managing furloughed staff, aligning fewer people across territories, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the next slide. But in this week's survey, 54% of our respondents indicated they were going to have some level of difficulty dealing with having furloughed staff and fewer salespeople aligned across territories. And then finally, another key challenge that we're seeing is really understanding customer requirements and expectations around reopening. So when will your customers reopen? Obviously, here in the US, all the states have different requirements, different opening calendars. You know, what will those protocols be? A couple of weeks ago, we did a survey, and about 60-ish% of organizations were going to allow the salespeople to determine whether they needed to wear masks when they were with customers. So obviously, you know, navigating customer requirements on safety and, you know, when you can connect face to face, and then also trying to determine what your customer priorities are going to be in terms of what they're looking for, how they want to buy, what they need to buy. And now we're going to talk about the sales leaders, what your issues and responses were on the difficulties of reopening. So in this week's survey, we did ask questions around the degree of difficulty in managing challenges, and we kind of grouped those challenges by topic. So travel, safety, working across your internal departments, and customer management. And what we're showing you here are the top challenges from each of those topics. So the most prevalent challenges that you all are experiencing, obviously safety is a huge issue. Managing different opinions from your managers, your management, and your team. So we know a lot of frontline sales managers are kind of caught right there in the middle. You're managing up, and you're also having to communicate down. So really managing those different opinions on safety. In addition, you're also concerned with managing employees relative to returning to the office. So handling concerns of internal folks that are returning to the office and those that are wanting to continue to work from home. We also mentioned earlier redistributing that workload, realigning territories across a smaller team, and then safety issues, establishing safe travel policies for your team, as well as working with human resources on safe sales team policies and practices.
And Michelle, I just add that the way this chart is laid out so everyone understands is the lower the bar, the smaller the number, the greater concern that people see in doing the work. I just wanted to share a few questions that came up in my research that people I think are struggling with HR to help people think through this issue. First of all, should an employee have to notify the company if they become exposed or have symptoms or test positive for COVID-19? One of the things we're seeing from OSHA is that it does have to be reported by the company if it's contracted at work. If it's not contracted at work, then it doesn't have to be if you have that level of certainty. Some questions around masks. What do you do if you have an employee who has a difficult breathing, say due to asthma or some other health condition, while they're wearing a mask? Or what happens if an employee refuses to wear a mask or intentionally miswears their PPE? What happens if you have employees who read lips and they have to be able to see lips in order to be able to communicate? What's the right way to approach social distancing? I spoke this week to my son who works for a major manufacturer. You would all know it. I'm not going to mention it. But he said that in many cases they've tried to dummy-proof their operations, but they have a saying internally that says no matter how hard you try, there'll always be a smarter dummy. And so, setting up these safety things are not necessarily going to be easy. Childcare is one. How do you handle hospitalization of a business traveler who comes down with COVID-19 and has to go? And then what do you do if employees refuse to come to work because of fear of infection? And we've got a URL coming up in just a little bit that will address some of those more specifically.
And a word from our sponsor, Russ. Can you tell us, we talked a little bit about the Brooks Sales Leadership Forum earlier. Could you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. I think the biggest question that we're all dealing with is we've never experienced anything like this. So what's the right thing to do? Where do we need to focus? What do we need to change on? And as someone said in my forum this week, look, I have a full-time job being a sales leader and a business leader. How am I now supposed to almost pick up a full-time job working on the policies as it relates to going back into people's offices, customers' offices, et cetera. And that's where the Brooks Sales Leadership Forum really kind of shines. It's peers discussing what they've been trying, sharing what works, what isn't working, how are they adapting. It's an hour a week that allows you to be able to gain some new insights and ideas from those who are just like you. A couple other topics we talked about last week is price pressure. Some folks have reached out to customers and found that they appreciate the call but immediately want to talk about a price decrease, as well as a new emphasis on customer service. How do you maybe even monetize some of those services that you used to offer for free? So if you're looking for some peers who can help you with the problems that you're navigating right now, email us, forum@thebrooksgroup.com. We have new groups that are kind of forming every week. Would love to have you be a part of that. So let's move on and take a look now at some of the data and thoughts that we're seeing from what are the challenges that sort of lie ahead of us. And so the first thing that we really see is it is highly likely that the economy that we're going to be selling into for some period of time is going to be smaller than it was when we built our plans in January. I'm seeing anywhere from people calling it the 80% economy, the 90% economy. PricewaterhouseCoopers is out with a new survey of CFOs this is in the U.S. About 29% see a decline of somewhere between 10 and 25% in their business this year. About 24% see a 25% or greater decline. So overall, 53% of the people are seeing, 10% or more. We're even seeing, for those of you who might be running nonprofits, the idea that nonprofits should be budgeting at a 60% level this year compared to where they were last year, because they feel giving and donations will be less than it was before. So what are we going to do? Number one, really, we talked about this a little bit last week, but refocus where your teams are going and how they're deployed. Now is the time to implement territory planning, to be able to focus on what's the really key accounts in the really key markets that are still buying, maybe even realigning some of your people to work in those areas that are most productive. Plan on having different relaunch maps by segment, by region, by site, by territory. Yes, I know that's a huge amount of work, but just as Michelle mentioned earlier, states are opening at different rates. Markets are opening at different rates. How is that going to impact you, and how does it impact your selling routines? And then be ready to both figure out what happens if things move faster, what happens if things move slower, and what happens if there's a second wave. S&A budgets, we're sensing from everything we see from CFO studies, budgets are going to be tighter and they're going to be pinched. And then pricing discussions and negotiations. This is our topic for the week. Next week, we're going to talk about the new realities of price pressure and selling value. But I just want to say to cue that up, it's going to come both from customers asking for better discounts and competitors hungry for business. And if it has been an issue for you in your business in the past, it will only get worse. So this is an area where you may want to think about some additional work with your teams. A lot's going to be different in this new normal. We're seeing some people being very effective from working at home. A survey said 31% of the people are more effective in sales from home, 29% as effective, which makes about 40% less effective. And a leadership question is, or a management question is, why are some groups better than others? Is it by segment? Is it by rep? Have I got the right mix in terms of what I need? Do I need more inside people, more customer service reps? I want to call out this one about safety guarantees in a couple of ways. First of all, I would encourage you to be proactive in talking to your customers about how you're going to keep them safe, whether that's with sales visits or with product shipments. I read this week that, and this is the only data I could find, in Germany, 85% of their GDP drop in the second half of April was 100% related to supply chains. 70% of the GDP drop in France was related to supply chain. PricewaterhouseCoopers says that 54% of CFOs are going to be auditing, going to understand what supplier health and their operational health is. So be proactive, invite visits, get your executives and other managers on the phone with your customers. Be proactive and show them you're not only involved in keeping their people safe and healthy, but you've done what you can to keep the supply safe and healthy. Be a resource on reopening those facilities. I'm seeing a lot of data that's out there as your HR teams are coming up with things. If they're good and solid, be willing to share what you can find. It's a great way to build your value as a strategic resource. And then skill sets. The biggest one we're seeing right now is a conversation around should clinicians and technicians and subject matter experts and CSR have a better ability to surface opportunities and to sell. And so ask yourself that question around what's the right skill set do I need and how do I get them there? And then the last piece from a management perspective is how do I go faster? We've labeled this section urgency. And the idea of urgency is how do we really make sure that we're making the right decisions as quickly as we can? There's a 2011 book out called Everything is Obvious with an asterisk, and then you look at where the asterisk leads and it says, once you know the answer. And in the book, the author posits this point that solutions to complex problems are usually not obvious. And so you have to watch out for, he calls 3 different kinds of bias. I just want to talk about anecdotal bias. Anecdotal bias would say, well, I read about one person who was 104 years old. They recovered from COVID. Therefore, no senior citizens need to worry about COVID. So as you're making these decisions, make sure you both recognize what you know and recognize what you don't know. I heard this morning that the U.S. Forest Service has completely rewritten their operational manual around fighting fires, wildfires this summer, how they're going to keep crews safe, and they're prepared to iterate. They're going to have to go through a series of changes on that. Before Michelle changes the slide, you'll see 3 URLs there to the left. The first one points you towards a state-by-state consideration of what's happening with travel. What can you move from one state to another? It's updated. I believe that's a CDC link. So that's a great one for learning about putting your people on the road. Number two is a law firm who has a state-by-state approach to what are the legal and HR issues. It's a free resource of a whole bunch of questions and answers they posted. And then the last one is, again, a summary of what is each state currently issued for stay-at-home, and how do those changes get implemented going forward. And Rich, if you would post that, that would be great. We've had a couple of questions come in through that. Michelle, are there things that we want to cover now or pick up later?
Why don't we get through the next slide, and we'll be at our Q&A and we can address those then.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's then talk about the people challenges, or what I'm calling empathy. We've talked a lot in this program and this webinar about how our first reaching out to our clients was around empathy. Now it's going to be a little bit more about our own teams. And I'm going to start this by saying, as sales leaders, we now have the importance of being good salespeople as we go through this. If you try to dictate a solution, everything I'm reading says trying to get people back together just because you want them to be together, or worse, because there's a sense of greater control when you're people in one office, will backfire. And what we're seeing from that is that it's highly likely that the way you handle the next 6 months will impact both your involuntary turnover or voluntary turnover, where people will leave because they want to go somewhere else, where people might retire, or just their commitment to the job in terms of being able to work hard. They're going to ask the question, did my manager, did my leadership care for my safety, and did they keep me safe? Excuse me, not that they keep me safe. They know there's a risk out there, but they're going to be looking first and foremost at your concern over their safety. There is a model for transitions called the Bridges Transition Model. And right now you go from the end of the old ultimately to the beginning of the new, but in the middle is this thing called transition. And that's when people process the psychological considerations coming to grips with change. And it's marked by confusion and distress. You went through it the first 2 weeks of this shelter at home. The last 2 weeks of March, your people were really struggling. You're going to see the same thing as they start to come back into the office. I call it the Disneyland versus Disney World experience. If you've been to both theme parks, when you walk out of the Pirates of the Caribbean in Disneyland, you end up in a different place than when you walk out in Disney World. And though it's the same ride with the same expectations, when you get out, there's a confusion that takes place. Now, it's not necessarily distressful, but it's still confusion. And so people are going to think when I'm back in the office, things are back to normal, and they won't be. Second idea, around the idea of equal worth but different opinions. We all value our employees. What we teach at Impact in the first step is the better your rapport, the better and easier it is to build trust. And when you have trust, in Impact we talked about how your prospects will be comfortable to open up, to share, to discover what your core wants really are. In management, it's the same thing. The more trust we have, the more our people are going to open up to us to share and to discover core wants. And when it comes to equal worth and different opinions, that's the impact step of probe. That's when we're going to ask the questions, and trust is going to allow our people to be able to answer them honestly. Right now, there's about an even split between those who are afraid to come out and those who think the pandemic is overblown. So we need to ask and listen. It's a critical skill because if you mishandled, everything I'm saying says all goodwill you built up to this point in the process can come apart. So ask and listen as we teach and probe. And then ultimately in sales leadership, the last piece is, moving on, understanding the situation through what kind of gap exists, what's happening, who is and isn't hearing about decisions that you're making. I had the issue come up this week where we were moving quickly on something and left an important person out of that process. So make sure you're communicating, even if it feels like you're communicating too much. Ask your team to get involved in the processes. Now's a great time for whiteboarding, whether it's virtual or others, and saying, if we were starting all over again, what would we do differently? And then finally, I love what Jim Dethmer says with conscious leadership. He says, look for that whole body yes, when your people's heads, their hearts, and their guts are all into it, meaning I've thought it through and I think it's the right thing to do. I feel it's the right thing to do, and my experience, my gut tells me it's the right thing to do. If you're not getting that, chances of resistance coming up are significantly higher. What we're talking about through all of these things is something we call emotional intelligence, and or EQ, and it's really the ability to understand and manage your own emotions, and then to be able to use those to be able to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously. Based on your DISC profile, this will be easier or harder for some people. If you're a D, you're ready for this thing to be done. And so the whole emotional thing may not be something you're interested in. It'll be harder for you to adapt. If you're an I, you care about your people, but you may not be willing to push them with the urgency that you need to push. S's, you want to name it, you want to talk about the process, you're steadies. You're uncomfortable because of the level of change, but you know that to bring the team along, it's important. And for C's, it's going to be hard, but look at the data. There's a lot of research out there in terms of emotional intelligence and the ability to build teams. I know emotions are not things we talk about a lot in the business world. It's a soft skill, but it's very important. It's going to be key for being able to coax people back to work in a way in which they feel is safe. We don't have a lot of time to go into it today, but at the Brooks Group, we offer both coaching, assessments and coaching on emotional intelligence. We may be thinking about maybe putting together a webinar or a workshop on it. If you'd like to know more about kind of your ability to handle that side of the leadership challenge, drop an email to webinar@thebrooksgroup.com and just put EQ somewhere in that. E is in emotional, Q is in quotient, and we will get back to you with that data. So with that, I think we've got some questions, Michelle, that we could take.
Absolutely. And actually, we have one that came in just a little while ago, and I think you kind of touched on it with the EQ conversation. But looking at sales success and differences based on the Brooks Talent Index, which is our personal assessment. And obviously, I think, as Russ, you were just talking about, that is certainly something that we can help folks with. If they've had the assessment, if they've have their teams taken the assessment, or they're interested in using it in terms of how their team can adapt in the current environment, and what kind of obstacles and pitfalls might they see.
And I think every behavior style can adapt, but you're going to adapt, or you're going to struggle in different ways with that adaptation. We talked about change being difficult for steadies. D's embrace change, but they're going to be impatient that it's not coming fast enough, or not knowing when this is over. You know, one of the key things is just the unknown. Are we going to be this way for weeks, for months, for longer than months? That's a big issue in terms of people thinking through this process.
And we have not done any kind of formal study relating the assessment to the current environment. So that's a great suggestion, kind of underlying in that question, that we will definitely take a look at. But absolutely, there are some connections there. We had a
question come in about effective means of connecting business to business and new prospects in the place of live trade show events. That's a part of what last week's webinar was about, as well as the workshop this week and the workshop they're repeating on Tuesday. Both the ability to do simulated events where you can provide pictures of where you might be together, or be able to walk people through, virtual booths, or just say, hey, if you're at our booth, we'd spend 30 minutes catching up on new products. Let's do that. Maybe sending them a poster or a T-shirt or something that kind of connects them with that. All of those things are worthwhile as you think about replacing face-to-face trade shows.
Russ, question: how do you think that managers should deal with upcoming burnouts after what sellers have been going through? So fears, losses, no customers. So obviously, that's burnout is an issue.
A huge issue, and I don't know that I'm the best person to speak to that. So we may have to do a little research and come back to you with a better answer next week. But I think that usually burnout can be attributed to people who are expecting certain results. They feel like they're working hard and they're either getting resistance or they're not getting those results. And as somebody said in one of our forums, you know, as salespeople, we just want orders, and not getting orders is hard for us. I think the best thing you can do as a manager is the idea of naming the uncertainty, name the fact that you know it's hard right now for people to not get orders, to be able to, again, not excuse it, but just to say we're all going through this time of uncertainty. We don't know when it's going to happen, and encourage, you know, healthy practices. There was somebody I talked to who said that they'd worked all night long on Zoom just because they could catch up. And while maybe that was critical for a deadline or something, it's important that people get up and walk around, and now more than ever, don't lose themselves so they're sitting in front of their screens, you know, 18 or 20 hours a day working on things. But I'll do a little reading and see if I can find some more on burnout as well.
I would also say for those of you out there that are feeling some level of that burnout and stress, join a forum. You know, the Brooks Sales Leadership Forum is a great opportunity to kind of help share that weight that you're feeling. And I know I've seen that at least in the forum that I'm involved with, and the ability just to kind of share and talk through some of those issues together. At least you know you're not alone, and you can share best practices and ideas from other sales leaders.
Michelle, my system has decided to just not play well. So I think we have another couple of questions and I can't see them. So if they're for me, could you read them to me?
Let's see, we have one comment. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in yet. So if you have questions, let us know. We did have one comment from a participant who just commented that they do not recommend changing payment terms. So once you do, it's difficult to bring customers back around. So he is suggesting that we look for creative ways to deal with payments, which is a good point. Good point.
A very good point.
And any more questions? I will just make one other comment to circle back on what you mentioned, Russ, earlier, which is really looking at the skill set of your team as you move into the reopening economy. I know many of the organizations that I'm dealing with and working with, if they have an outside sales, or let's say a capital equipment sales team versus parts, service, customer service, oftentimes the parts and service folks have more access to customers right now than the product salespeople. And that has actually been a good way to help them make up lost revenue, find new avenues, and take advantage of every opportunity when they're, you know, in front of a customer, whether that's literally face-to-face or virtually in front of a customer.
Yep. Good thoughts.
All right, we have one more question.
All right.
Russ, what would you suggest to sales managers that are thinking of downsizing their sales force?
Well, that's a pretty broad and vague question. You know, unfortunately, we downsize based on just corporate constraints or company constraints in terms of what we can afford to do or not do. I think that the most important part when you're doing that is make sure you have a clear understanding of what you need for your sales reps as you look forward. I've never felt that it was, and again, let me put this in the caveat of, I don't know what the particular legal ramifications you have in your country or your state, but to just take a segment and say everybody in this segment has got to go away, I don't think is always the best thing for organizations. Understand what skill sets you need, understand the kind of capacity you need people to have, and then look at the folks that you have on the team and make sure they're currently connected with those kind of strengths and capabilities. I think the one other thing that I would talk about is think about people who are able to be cross-trained. If you are gonna downsize, you're gonna have fewer people, so therefore they may have to cover more aspects, and therefore you may need more specialists, more generalists, and fewer specialists overall. Michelle, as we start to wrap up, I just want to touch on one last thing. We also are looking at how we can make decisions better and faster as an organization. There is a survey that's going out right now in terms of sales skills and how people that we can communicate with rank the importance of certain things. If you get an email from somebody at the Brooks Group, one way or the other, we would really appreciate you taking the time to fill it out. It does take some time. It's about a 6 to 9 minute survey to fill out. We're giving you the option, or people who complete the survey, for every completed survey, we're going to be donating $1 to Feed America, which is a food charity very needed at this particular time. But if you get that, we would really appreciate you using it.
Thank you, Russ. As a reminder, and to answer a question that has come in, we will be sending out a recording of today's presentation, and you can also access it on our website. So yes, we will be providing that to our participants.
And I will ask to see whether or not we can get those 3 URLs included in that email that goes out, so you've got easier access to those sets of data. Wonderful,
thank you. And so next Friday, we will be talking about the new realities of price pressure and selling value. I know that's been a hot topic this week, as Russ mentioned, so we're going to be digging into that. And let's see. And if you're interested in joining our forum, be sure to send an email to forum@thebrooksgroup.com.
Yeah. And just one other thing, if there's a way in which either we can steer a future webinar or help answer questions in other ways, we want to be a resource for you. So reach out, either of those emails, forum or webinar, with a question, and we can, if we can help, we may have some retraining skills and those kinds of things.
Yes.
All right.
I think that wraps up the questions for today. And so we will see everyone next Friday, and be sure to look for the survey link for next week coming out on Monday.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.